Hello everyone, and welcome to the Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. There's no place like home, right? Well, sure, but is that always a good thing? We know when Dorothy said it, she meant it positively. No place as wonderful as home. She was desperate to get back to her safe place. Of course, for some, home isn't their safe place, is it? Right. For some, they'd rather be anywhere but home. Or more accurately, they'd like their home to be free of the things occupying it. So, how do you deal with spirits, entities, who invade your space? Do you cast them away? Enlist someone else to do the work for you? Sure, we'll hear about those cases. But we'll also hear from people who didn't win the battle for their space. People who were instead pushed out of their home sweet home by something a bit more sinister than they bargained for. So, let's get started, shall we? When I was around 10 years old, my cousins and I used to spend time at our grandfather's house. We would play at scaring each other in his dark room. The last person to leave would win the game. One August day, after we had just started playing, I saw a figure in a black cloak walk right by me before disappearing into thin air. I was obsessed with ghosts, so we tried to communicate with the entity. I told the others that everyone needed to wait outside, except for myself and one other person to serve as a witness. The others were only supposed to come in and turn on the lights when they heard me say the word lamp. Once they were gone, I held out my hand and I asked the entity to hold it. After a few seconds, I felt something long and sharp touch my thumb. I panicked, started repeating lamp, until the others came in and turned on the lights. My 6-year-old cousin, who had stayed in the room, was sitting on the bed, trembling. When I asked him what was wrong, he said he saw a figure with very long nails holding my hand. Apparently, something from another world touched me. I was so scared that I've never tried to communicate with it again. I moved into my aunt and uncle's house for about 2 years. I was a 5th grader. It was my 3 younger cousins, my sister and I, who were mostly in the home. I rarely remember my aunt being home, which should have been a red flag, and her husband worked the graveyard shift, so we weren't allowed to be rowdy during the day. The home is in this part of town that was historically settled by Irish immigrants, so a lot of deaths happened due to poor water hygiene and a fire that forced them out. The house previously belonged to my uncle's father, so he was very attached to the home. As an Asian immigrant, buying a home in those days was very rare because of how poor they were. The times when my aunt was home, they often argued. I can't remember about what. For a time, she didn't sleep in the same bed with her husband and slept with the kids in our room. I remember him wrestling her on the bed one day, breaking the window next to it. It felt more awkward than scary, because it felt more like they were hiding something. After that, I remember hearing my other aunt and grandma whispering, all about how the house should be sold and everyone should move out. All while this was happening, weird things would occur in the home. My aunt really liked to gamble with her siblings, and I guess it was her way of being able to stay away from home late at night, while my uncle was off at work. Like all children, my cousins, my sister, and I loved watching TV. Back when Adult Swim would air late-night anime, and we would all tune in the living room with our eyes glued to the latest or reruns of Wolf's Rain episodes. One night, the doors connecting the living room to the foyer slammed shut. They were always left wide open because it was one of those weird house rules that we followed. All of us turned to see the panic on each other's faces. We ran into the girls' bedroom. We were terrified out of our minds. Once we all got into the room, we panicked even more because we'd left the lights and the TV on. If our aunt came home knowing we weren't sleeping, we were in trouble. We all demanded the oldest should go run and turn it off, which was my sister, but she refused. In our panic, someone asked, "Did we lock the door?" So we knew we were all fucked whenever our aunt came home, but we were all too scared to leave the bedroom after that experience. When my aunt did come home, she was furious. The lights were on, the TV was on, the doors weren't locked, and children were up past midnight. She asked and we told her the truth. The look in her eyes I'll never forget. It was confirmation that she too experienced the same things in that house. We were chewed out and my aunt went about pretending that nothing happened. But things kept escalating. They got dogs and would leave them in different places throughout the home at night. In the middle of the night, sometimes one dog would bark at the darkness, as if something were there, which only made my aunt unhinged even more. I ended up moving in with my grandma in the middle of 6th grade and escaped that place. But even 20 plus years later, I still have nightmares about that house. My aunt did end up selling the house years later to an Italian restaurant behind it because they wanted to expand their parking lot, and they never have. I believe it's because the land is cursed, or the entity won't allow them to build. My aunt wasn't a Christian. She hired a shaman for years to cleanse and rid the spirits that were lingering, but there was no success. After selling the house, a giant cross was built in front of the home, and posters of Jesus and the cross were zip-tied to the fence around the property. So this story is short, but safe to say it creeped the hell out of me, and I still tell it to people ever so often. My nanny, Mom's mom, lived in an older house when I was younger. My family always joked that it was haunted because we always heard bumps and bangs and stuff. Just overall, it gave a creepy vibe. It got to where I wouldn't stay the night over there unless I had to because my parents worked a lot. When I was 15, I was staying at Nanny's and we were in her bathroom, doing something, getting ready for bed. It was just me and Nanny, alone in the house, aside from her older poodle. Rest in peace, Brandy. Best doggo ever. Anyway, out of nowhere, we heard a huge crash coming from the kitchen. We ran in there to find Brandy hiding under the kitchen table, trembling, and her food dishes upside down across the kitchen from where they would normally sit. They were heavy ceramic bowls that sat down and in those metal trays. There was water and food everywhere. At first, we were like, "Brandy, what did you do?" And then we kind of realized that the bowls and the tray weighed more than she did. She was probably 8 pounds or so. Plus, she was pretty old at this point. The stand was also upside down in the middle of the kitchen. No clue what happened that night, but safe to say we were thoroughly freaked out. Other things happened often, like stuff falling off the walls and such. I'm glad she doesn't live there anymore. My grandfather was in his early 60s and heart failure. He was in the hospital, and my family spent a lot of time with him the last 2 weeks before he passed. This one specific day, there were 6 of us female relatives in the room sitting around chatting with him. He suddenly interrupted our convo abruptly, looked around the room asking which one of us was pregnant. We all denied it. He insisted, "Someone in this room is pregnant. Who is it?" But none of us had any idea what he was talking about. He'd been saying things like people were visiting him at night, and there were a lot of people in his room at times. He was saying that he was seeing people who had passed on, so we just thought maybe he was hallucinating due to the pain meds. Fast forward a few weeks, I find out I'm pregnant. My ultrasound revealed that my baby had a weak heartbeat and to expect a miscarriage. Within the week, I miscarried, unfortunately. The crazy thing is, at the time my grandpa insisted someone was pregnant, I would have been about 2 weeks along. He somehow knew. It's always made me question what people see when they're near death. He ended up being intubated. They took everything out one day, and he had just enough strength to tell my mother that he was now afraid to die, based on what he'd been seeing. He couldn't talk well with everything, so my mom didn't ask many questions, but he died the next day. I always wonder what he saw. Growing up, I always had to move from one place to another. There was this apartment in particular that terrified me. I was about 7 or 8 when weird stuff started happening. Basically, things would go missing. Things would get moved, and I'd hear footsteps in the hallways. Once my dad heard someone small running. He thought it was my sister, called out to her, but nobody answered. When he came to check on me and my sister, he found us both fast asleep. We always shared a room. One time, my mom baked a cake at night. I don't know why she decided to bake it at night, but she did. That night, we heard muffled chewing sounds. It wasn't my parents, as they'd gone to sleep hours before. Their room was in front of mine, and I would have seen them come out. The next day, we found half the cake was gone. Another time, my dad bought a GPS. He was very happy with it and put it on the table. The next day, it was gone. Me and my sister didn't touch it because my dad was very strict, and we used to be scared of what would happen if we touched it. My mom was home all day, but she's a busy woman and couldn't care less about a GPS. It was gone for a week, and then it was found. One day, my dad called my mom asking her where she found the GPS. It was right where he left it. This freaks me out the most. I had a saint, a paper with a saint on it. We call it a saint here. No matter how many times I got rid of the saint, it always comes back. I ripped it apart so many times. I shredded it, and it always returns to my desk. I no longer live in that house, but every time I walk by it, I get this feeling of dread. I'm 23 and in college. I live in a small college town in a 2-bedroom apartment by myself. This was about 2 weeks ago. I was taking the trash out to my dumpster at the complex, which wasn't too far. I didn't lock the door, and I know for sure I didn't because I have a camera. I was carrying heavy furniture, so I know I wouldn't have been able to lock it. When I returned from the trash, I heard myself complaining on the other side of the door. When I realized it was my voice, I froze in fear for about 10 seconds, then tried to open my door. The door was locked, and the voice was gone as soon as I put my hand to the door. I say I was complaining because that's the best way I can refer to the way I was speaking. Whatever that was upset and loud. I've thought about what this could have been over and over again. I checked my camera, which picks up my every movement and usually picks up sound, but nothing was there. My friend said that maybe it could have been some sort of skinwalker, or some sort of glitch in the matrix of myself where she wasn't supposed to be. About 6 months ago, my girlfriend and I stayed at the St. James Hotel in Red Wing, Minnesota. I'd heard stories about it being haunted before and was curious, but was mostly there for the beauty and history of the place. When we got to our room, I did a little Google search to read up on the history, came across a page talking about it being haunted. It said that the 3rd floor was considered the most haunted. We were on the 3rd floor. Then it explained that the 3rd floor had been the residence of an old hotel owner, and room 310 was her room. We were staying in room 310. The article didn't say anything about what she does to the room itself, but it said that she's active in the dining room, moving tables and silverware around, so I didn't know what to expect. The room has those fancy curtains that hang straight down and that you hook up with hooks that loop in the back. They look kind of scalloped when they're up. When we woke in the morning, some of the hooks and loops had been torn down and broken, like someone had pulled the curtain with some force. Others had been adjusted to be lower than they were originally. We hadn't heard anything during the night, and you need a stepping stool to reach the curtains in the first place. But that stool was in the same place that it had been when we checked in. The 2 windows facing the main road were fine, while the other 2 on the side had been messed with. My girlfriend swears up and down that she didn't do it. She's too short anyway. Plus, I'm a light sleeper. I would have heard her. It's probably just a coincidence, but an hour after we checked in, the door to the closet had already swung open. We joked that the lady of the house saw 2 lesbians walk in her room and decided to open a closet for us to go back in where we came from. We were spooked, and we still had to stay the night after that with our homophobic ghost friend, but nothing else happened. The hotel is beautiful, even if it has a heavy, eerie feeling everywhere. Apparently, there's a lot of other ghosts there besides this one, who we found out is named Clara. As a kid, I had a few paranormal encounters that I thought significant, 2 of which included a black-eyed child that resembled the Ring Girl, or the Grudge, but had bangs, looked exactly like a friend that I had in elementary school, only pale, white, and black-eyed. First time I saw her maybe 50 yards away, in the rear view as my dad drove me away. Second time, she was in my room as I went to go get something. She was on her knees on the opposite side of my bed. Anyway, I never paid much attention to it. I'm not saying the next encounter was the same entity or related, but I started wondering if they are. This one I know for a fact to be real. It was almost 3 years ago, 5 or 6 a.m. I was being nocturnal at the time. Me and my girlfriend were getting ready to go to sleep, but I went to the kitchen to get a snack as she followed. It wasn't clear what I was doing, so she asked me, "What are you doing?" Then she said, "What the fuck?" And I spun around right as she clicked the light in the hallway that was right above her. Immediately after she turned it on, just in time for me to see, as I just turned around, the light bulb exploded. A skinny figure resembling the girl from The Ring appeared. Only very tall, maybe 6 foot something, her body only being a few inches wide. It disappeared with the flash of the light from the exploding light bulb, leaving me and my girlfriend speechless. She said that she exclaimed, "What the fuck?" because she saw a white mist beside her, which is also why she turned on the light. It's the realest experience I've ever had, the most chilling. Me and that girlfriend broke up now, but the whole 2 years I was with her, creepy phenomena happened constantly. From the one I just mentioned to hearing voices, rhythmic tapping on windows, apparitions, dogs growling at nothing. And one time, I heard stomping running up to me from behind, despite being alone, but nothing like the skinny light bulb figure. The most notable other experiences were when we heard mumbling outside of our bedroom door, but we were alone in the house. When I was alone going to sleep, I saw a shadow figure walking parallel to my bed. Us talking about turning the bedroom light on, only for it to turn on by itself, right as we mentioned it. And items being moved, lost randomly, sometimes randomly appearing in the freezer of all places. My dog at the time was pretty quiet, unless we could physically see a person walking outside or something. But my girlfriend said that while I was at work, he would often growl at the hallway, hair standing up as well. I never had him do that the whole 15 years I had him. Almost all experiences were in the same house, and we both experienced them together and apart. but it was worse for her, especially when she was alone at the house and I was at work. There were also times in 2 other houses that she claimed to see someone laying beside her, facing her, despite being alone. I'll also mention, I never experienced things so real, even in that house, until I got with her, and everything ceased when we broke up. And haven't had many things happen since. It's been a year. Any thoughts? Was my ex haunted? Is the ring girl or figures like her only from folklore? Ever since I was a baby, I saw ghosts. My parents and I lived in a small house in Arizona. My mom would hear and see small children that weren't really there. She would see a tall black figure and a deformed woman. She told me stories about the children, how they would stand and watch her sleep. None of my other sisters experienced anything except my older sister. She would have to sleep with my parents because the boy in the corner was scaring her. My mom remembers one night when I went into their bathroom and was whispering to someone. My mom heard something mumble, and I responded, "I can't reach. I can't see you." There was a window, and it was on the 2nd story. My mom got up and quietly listened and heard something say something along the lines of, "Step up on the sink." She ran in and saw the figure on the wall disappear. She would see the figure watch me when I was a baby. She would see me playing with the children. This continued until we moved out. We lived without seeing anything like that for about a year. After my parents divorced, I moved into an apartment with my dad and remember seeing the figure again. I was around 6 or 7. One night I remember being woken up because I was sleepwalking. My dad heard me mumbling to something, and then something jiggled the lock on the front door. He said I unlocked it and walked out. We lived on the 2nd floor, and the only thing on the outside was a small fence and the stairs. He had to grab me because I was starting to climb the small fence. After that, he put another lock on the door, one I wasn't able to reach. I've always remembered seeing things that my sisters don't, and my mom was the only one who did. During the time in the house before my parents split, my mom would try to protect the house. She put special pouches in our rooms that we weren't supposed to touch. She'd burn candles and had a psychic come into the house and check. And after the divorce, she did the same thing at her apartment, while my dad didn't because he didn't believe her. My mom also went to a different psychic when I was still living in the first house, and before my mom ever said anything about the ghosts and figures, the lady told her to watch me closer. She described me perfectly, told my mom that they were communicating with me, that they wanted something from me, and to watch that tall, black figure the most. When I was in my early teens, I believe I was followed by the spirit of a young girl. I believe she inhabited one of my porcelain dolls my grandmother had given me. Often I'd see her in my dreams or feel her presence. I can't really explain it, but I feel like she may have been the ghost in this story. My parents used to live in a big 3-story house that had an old built-in intercom. There were speakers in every room of the house, minus bathrooms, and even though it was old, we still liked playing around with it every now and then. You'd have to have the speaker turned on and turn the volume all the way up, usually, to hear anything at all. You also had to physically push the button to speak into it. Once in a while, the intercom would come on by itself and play something on the radio. I found this spooky, but my mom brushed it off as the past owner having set an alarm via the intercom, so the radio would come on at certain times. We didn't know how to reprogram it, as hard as my stepdad tried. My parents were tired of often getting woken up at 3 a.m. by the radio randomly coming on through the intercom in their room. So we decided to just not use it anymore, turned off all the intercoms, with the volume all the way down just as an extra measure. One night I was chatting online with my friends on the computer, and I hadn't noticed the time was around 3 a.m. Suddenly, the intercom came on in my room at full blast. It was horribly loud static coming through. I jumped up to shut it off, but as I reached for the volume dial, I saw it was already at 0. I didn't know how to make the noise stop. Then, through the static, I faintly heard what sounded like someone breathing, and then I heard the voice of a little girl. She said, "When will you come to your senses?" And then, just as fast as it had come on, the intercom shut off. Silence. I was frozen with fear. Being a teen, I jumped back on the computer to tell my friends what had just happened, and they said, "Get out of that house." I had to go tell my parents. The hallway was pitch black, and I had to go all the way down a big staircase in the dark to their room. I held my breath and flung my door open, sprinted down the stairs, crying from how scared I was. I banged loudly on my parents' door and heard my mom yelp. She opened the door and I ran in to tell them what had happened. They were more upset that I woke them up. My mom told me it was probably just a commercial on the radio or something. I mentioned how my intercom had been turned off with the volume turned down to 0, and also what kind of commercial would say something like that. Seeing as it was so late, she didn't feel like trying to rationalize it. I was sent back up to bed. And if you guessed I didn't sleep that night, you'd be correct. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode, but don't miss a brand new one every Friday night, and my other weekly uploads every Sunday and Wednesday. Appreciate it if you would like this video, turn on notifications, and of course, talk to me in the comments. I want to thank those who shared their stories, and a big thanks to all of you for listening. A huge shout out to all of my patrons who I appreciate so very much. TRACY S, TAMARA K, Monica L, ZOEWATT, Shelly B, Donald C, MARION T, Rat Girl, ALISHA S, ERIN G, NIKKI H, Mr. Revenant, Naz K, Brendan G, Paul T, Nicholas C, LISSANE, ARLENE F, and ADRIENNE. If you'd like to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Thanks everyone, and stay spooky.